Story Time with Stephanie Storey.
I'm here. This is a story time. I am Stephanie Storey, historical novelist, and I am here talking to some of my favorite writers about their processes and their passions and what makes their work relevant to your life today. My very first episode, this one, my pilot, I am here with one of my longtime, very good friends, and which is why we were laughing when this first started. Very good friends and brilliant writer. She is the author of 2 books that have been published, Burnt Bread and Chutney, and Consider the Feast. We will talk about both of those. But this is my very good friend. Welcome to the show, Carmit Delman.
Thank you, Stephanie. It's great to be here with you.
It's very weird. I know this is what the whole world is doing right now, communicating via Zoom, but I still find it very uncomfortable and weird.
I know I'm in my attic, stuffy couch behind me, door locked. It's all very strange.
It's not necessarily ideal, but we will see what we can do here. So one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you, particularly at this moment in time, is because your novel that came out last fall is what I would classify as dystopian, and we will talk about that. And so I wanted to talk to you about what it's like to write dystopian fiction and read dystopian fiction at this moment in time when we are living through this strange world. But before we do that, I thought we should set the scene a little bit. I feel like you and I are going through this moment, this COVID-19 outbreak, global pandemic moment, totally different experiences. I have gone back to family property in central Arkansas, hanging out by a lake, away from humanity in a lot of ways, living in a rural part of the country. And you are outside of New York City, right near New Rochelle, which was like the big hotspot.
Yeah.
COVID-19 when it first hit your area. Tell me what this experience has been like for you and your family in like a broad way.
Yeah, it's been very surreal, and we've actually been pretty much in quarantine and isolation for just about a full month now, starting like March 2nd. So, we've been in for a long time and isolated, and only recently has kind of the rest of the city sort of caught up with us. So in some ways now it's starting to feel like it's been a blessing that we've been out of the picture for so long, because we've been away from crowds and away from stores for the most part for weeks now. But that said, I do still go out. Just today I went out to do a couple of essential errands, and it was a ghost town, and everybody's walking around. The few people that are walking around have masks on, and there's sirens going by, and it's just it's surreal that this is our reality. And every day I sort of wake up having to reconcile what feels like a movie with real life. And so it's been very strange, and just trying to acclimate to it and keep positive within it. And at the end of the day, our inconveniences are really small potatoes compared to what many people are grappling with. And there's just such pain and struggle out there, and it's really hard to think of the amounts of suffering that are going on as we're just sort of worried about keeping ourselves busy in here and what Netflix show to watch.
Right now, but when you say complete quarantine for a month, so have you really been locked? Have you been able to go to the grocery store? Like, people still go to Kroger sometimes. Lowe's apparently is very crowded. I haven't been, but I hear it's very crowded. Have you been able to go out at all, or has it really been like hunker down kind of thing?
So one of my children was in quarantine for a couple of weeks. Just kind of a protective quarantine, because he had been at an event with somebody who had tested positive. And this was very early on. They closed the school. This was like the first case that happened in New Rochelle. And so he was in quarantine, and then the rest of my kids were sort of in quarantine, just because they wanted to make sure anybody who had been to school was going to be isolated. And then so they were all in, and they were doing virtual learning really early on, and our school did a great job of that. So at least that is a small blessing that they hit the ground running with virtual learning.
So this is normal for them.
Right.
Yeah.
They have acclimated, and it's really kind of strange and interesting how especially children can get used to anything within a matter of time. And I see other parents who are now struggling with it as they're really just getting into this homeschool and the kids being locked down. And we've already been there, and I want to tell them that at some point it will become normal. As much as it seems unsustainable, we humans are capable of sustaining a whole lot that we don't really want to think about. So I think people will get used to this. So anyhow, my husband is asthmatic, so I've been trying to keep him under lock and key as well. So I've been the grocery store person. I'll go out and I'll come back and kind of hose off and wipe things down and hope for the best, because we do need to eat.
Right. I read in the New York Times the other day that in your area you're starting to flatten the curve. That's one of those new phrases I feel like we've all latched onto. That it's starting to maybe even out, or the spike starting to go down in your area, and that you guys might end up becoming a model for what other people do. Do you feel like it's starting to change or improve where you are, or does it still feel like madness when the president's talking about shutting down New York? And I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think since we're just outside of New York City, it may be a little bit different. I think being in the city, in apartments, where everything is so congested and people are stacked, it's a little bit harder. And I feel like the air there is still pretty viral. But where we are, it's a little bit removed, and we have been doing this longer. So I guess there is hope in that if people do what I've been doing and what my family's been doing, my neighbor's been doing, it hopefully will pay off at some point very soon.
I hope so.
Yeah.
It feels like it's getting so weird out there, and time's getting weird and all of that.
Yeah.
But it's one of the reasons why all of this that we've been talking about is one of the reasons why this does feel like this weirdly dystopian moment in our society. Like, it feels like this fast forward to this futuristic society where we're somehow post-apocalyptic or something. This horrible thing has happened and we don't know how to adjust. I've read in some places, I've read like on Twitter, random people complaining, I can't handle reading dystopian fiction right now because it's too close to reality. I was actually reading Margaret Atwood's The Testament when this all started breaking down. And I found it really helpful to be in that world. Let me stop here, and I'm going to give like a breakdown of how I would describe your book, and then you can tell me where I'm wrong or where I'm right, so that anybody who's watching knows what we're talking about. Consider the Feast. I described it when I blurbed it as if Gordon Ramsay and Margaret Atwood got in a kitchen and cooked up a story, because that's how it feels to me, right? It's about, I'm going to give you the broad piece. To me, the part that really always sticks with me is it's this slightly futuristic New York City in which there's the Quarter, which are where wealthy people go to have these really over-the-top, extravagant food experiences, pushing the edges of the kinds of experiences you can have, the kinds of things you can eat, a full all-around experience of food, and it's all serviced by or supported by a working, very poor class of people who are working to support it. So that's sort of the basic world that you built for this story. To me, that's how I still take it in and still feel it. So to me, it's been really interesting to think about it in terms of how much, well, wait, first of all, am I right? Am I right about how I describe your book, or am I completely wrong?
Absolutely. It's not just about the food. It's also about that piece of sort of experiencing the divide between those who are feasting and those who are who are servicing the feast. And for me, that always felt like the subtext of our pleasures in this culture, especially within food culture. So that was what I wanted to kind of push and explore further. And so you got it right. So that's good to know.
I feel like I was having a test. Okay, but one of the interesting things to me is watching several things about food during this pandemic have come to mind as it sort of relates to your book. And I'm wondering what your perspective on is it, since you did write about this, were very prescient about a lot of a lot of this in a weird way. One is the hoarding in the grocery stores. Is there's something fascinating to me about going in and there's certain things on the shelves that are missing and not other things. How have you looked at that and seen it, and eh, have you been struck by what's been there and what hasn't been there, and why are we hoarding the food? I think is what I want to know. Do you know?
Right. It is interesting because from everything I've heard, we're not facing a shortage in the long term, right? Maybe something is missing today, but it will be replaced tomorrow. And even in Italy, which is more advanced, in a more advanced state than we are, that seems to be the case as well. So nobody is going to starve from this, as far as we know. It's rather just a fear that we will get to that point, which is maybe not unexpected, because nobody knows what to make of this time. But what is interesting, I feel as though initially people have gone into quarantine with not I wouldn't say playful, but with sort of the feeling of a snow day. We're going to drink wine, we're going to have this cozy experience, so I feel like the things that people are stockpiling are, of course, the toilet papers and such, but are also kind of the comfort foods that that sort of create an ambiance. I don't know if that's just my cynicism, but I feel like there's kind of been initially this expectation, which I think actually has quite quickly sort of started to wilt, but an expectation that this was going to be short-lived, that this experience would be, something that could be kind of framed and encapsulated, and would be, sort of a foodie adventure in its own way, if that makes sense. So I don't know. So I think there's been that element of it, but there also has been just this primal urge to just to survive. And I think that at the end of the day, that's kind of what's kicking in for a lot of people, is this, we're sort of waking up to us as beings, is like part of, I keep coming back to this idea, like we are actually just these vulnerable parts of a biological system. And for so long, we have, for most of our lives, I mean, all of our lives, we've really thought ourselves above it. And so I think there's this primal survivor instinct that is, kind of accompanying the hoarding, in which we do recognize our vulnerability, and we do see the potential to starve, even though that's not really there, and even though that's still so foreign to us.
It is interesting to me. You said that people see it almost as like an adventure some way. My mother has almost been excited about, well, what new things can I try? What new things can I throw in a pot out of my cabinet? As though this was like an excuse to A, try new things, and B, I've been noticing that everybody, I think, has been more resourceful, that we've been using our resources a little bit better. I've noticed certainly how much more food I used to throw out than I do now. And that reminds me of that indulgence that I feel like that might change after this, our indulgence with food.
I agree. I think you're right. And I've even seen that spoken of in terms of the restaurant industry now, is that there will be sort of a reckoning, right? Not all of these restaurants that have died will be able to resurface. There will be sort of more of an efficiency or an economy about what is actually resurrected. But there is, where we're all sort of doing a reckoning. I agree. I am looking differently at how much I use of this or that, and I guess once life has shifted, it's hard to turn back. Like now, if just the thought of a crowd, or seeing a crowd in a newspaper, like, makes me crazy. Like it seems like an insane act. And once you've isolated, or once you've reached the end of your supply of rice or whatever it is, you've understood the world in a different way. And I think that's kind of what we're coming to. And it's it's not often, this is a once in a generation experience, different from anything else, obviously from like 9/11 or any moment that passes. This is a moment that hasn't passed, that we don't know how it will pass. So we're all just kind of waiting with bated breath.
And so much of consider the feast is around these like weird, really high-end restaurants. I mean, like strange experiences that I wouldn't dare try to describe because they're done too well by you. Um, do you think that kind of is that high end kind of, are we going to rush back to it and cling back to that move toward really high end indulgence? Or are we going to pull away from it, do you think? Like, are we now headed down the road that we were to get to the quarter in your book? Or are we now headed off into like pack it all up and not
Right.
anymore?
It is always the pendulum. I do think that we were getting to a very extreme point, the one side of the pendulum in which it was just such an exploded culture. And I think now, by necessity, we have moved to the other side. I do think that what emerges from this will just be more moderate in some ways to start. We'll just be more hesitant. And, once you've I think about, for example, people who lived through the Depression or the Holocaust. They and their children have a very particular experience of food culture, right? The saving and the skimping and using every last bit. So I think that we'll be changed by that in the same way. And I think we will just be, by definition, a little bit more moderate, because it will feel extravagant to us in a way that just won't be as palatable anymore.
So sort of circle back to an earlier question. Are you reading dystopian fiction right now? Do you want to write it, or do you want total escapism? I've heard both ends. I feel educated with it. I feel edified by it, by reading it right now. In some way, as though it's helping me process or understand the moment, but other people are total escapism about it. How are you feeling about that?
So I think because I was living so long in a dystopian writing space, I've kind of moved away from it for a little bit. Um, and I was reading all different kinds of things, but I have found historical fiction, like your new beautiful Raphael, to be the perspective that I need, to be the perspective that I need. I think generally history has been kind of healing in this moment for me, just to look at human history in its glorious artistic heights, and also just the longevity of it, and to see that we have come through so much, and that we can that there's a larger frame to this. Because I don't know about anybody else, but for me right now, it's hour to hour. I feel like this is the sum of my existence, of our existence. But we have walked this earth for thousands of years, and there have been plagues before, and this is obviously a new kind of devastating, but there have been many moments of devastation and of beauty. So just that perspective of history has been very helpful to me, I think.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about how it changes my perspective on people who lived through plagues or military sieges, because it has that feel of like we're all cramped in and you don't know what's going to happen. Okay, I'm going to move away a little bit from the dystopian because I have a couple other things I want to talk to you about. One of them is, so your first book, which is right over my shoulder right here, it was a memoir. So your first book published in 2002, right? So right after we finished graduate school, we went to graduate school together. And it was a memoir about your life growing up as an Indian Jewish girl, yes? Mm-hmm. And so I have a couple of questions. I'll start with, which one do you like better, writing memoir or writing fiction?
Definitely fiction.
Really? I'm so glad to hear that, because I loved this novel. Okay, go ahead.
Oh, good. In some ways I feel like my writing memoir was kind of an exercise for me in order to be able to get through the stories that had always been bubbling in my mind. And once I was able to get through those, then I could move into new stories, created stories. So for me, that was kind of just part of the process. And I can't imagine writing another memoir. I know some people sort of make that their genre, but I love the infinite nature of fiction, and memoir is just a tighter and more constricting genre. So for me, it's definitely fiction. And yeah, so I would, also it was just a book from an earlier me, a younger me, and I think anytime you look back at old writing, you think, oh my gosh, did I really say that?
That's always true. I think that's true for every writer, and that's fair to feel that way. But speaking of it being a younger you, this book was published in 2002. I feel like in those ensuing 20 years, almost 20 years, not quite, but 18, the world has changed so much in this realm of multiculturalism and being a little bit more embracing. We're not all the way there yet, but a little bit more embracing of multicultural people and of different heritages. How has that, so since the memoir came out, how has that aspect of your life changed over the last couple of decades, as I think we've grown at least a little bit as a society?
I think we have. I mean, my memoir, it tried to speak to straddling worlds. And I think
Indian and Jewish.
I'm sorry?
Indian and Jewish and American.
American, Israeli, just sort of having a foot in different places. And I do think that we have as a society become much better at dealing with kind of larger narratives of identity. Um, I think, and there's like a real energy and positive support behind being this or being that. What I think is missing still, and it's about the growth, the sort of the learning curve. I think we're still not good at accepting kind of the nuances of that. I mean, and I don't know, it's hard to sort of speak to this exactly, but I've seen this from other people who, say a Korean American writer who's finding that her story is not picked up by an editor because she's not expressing sort of like a positive Korean American identity, right? That part of it is like sort of feeling the negativity that she's absorbed over the years and grappling with that, and struggling and coming to terms with it in some ways and not in others, and reflecting some of that onto her children. So
People don't want to hear the negative version?
I think not. I mean, and part of it is because we are, as a society, essentially proud of being in a place where we can, put our energy and support behind, this strong identity or that strong identity, or like really embracing what it is to be an African American woman, and to own and to sort of like call back and to reaffirm your connection, or to take back your connection. And I think that we want it to be a positive experience, and not no single identity is positive, right? Whether or not you're straddling or still coming to terms with it, there's sort of this nuance that I think has not yet been like fully embraced. But that said, that in some ways I feel like that's kind of a nitpicky thing.
It would be nitpicky.
but we have come a long way, and I mean, certainly within Jewish circles, within Indian circles, like I feel like it's just a different world. We are blending and blurring, and it's that is our new reality. So it definitely feels to me like a story set in a different time period.
This just occurred to me as you were talking. Is this pandemic, this COVID-19, is it going to affect this conversation in any way? Because we've become so disconnected in our own worlds. And I feel like it means we're all craving to come back and be connected at the end. Is this going to help us overcome some of those differences, or is it just feeding fear about differences? do you think?
That's interesting. You know, I've been very disappointed to hear about the attacks on Asians
Yeah,
in
me
this
too.
country, right? That's disturbing. And you know, as much as I've been kind of heartened, like I said earlier on in this conversation, about the creativity of the restaurant industry, learning how, you know, to navigate in this time period. It's definitely made me aware, and I think a lot of people aware of those who are not stopping to go to work and do make deliveries, and those who have no choice but to man the kitchens. So you know, I think people maybe are going to be in some ways more aware of these divides, as a result of what's going on today. I think that they are more aware of it. I don't know, you know, ultimately how that plays out, when we go back to some normalcy.
Yeah, I don't either. And I don't know, the same thing with, as you were pointing out, the class differences of how I can't fathom being a homeless right now,
Right.
of having to grapple with trying to find food and a place to shelter if you needed to quarantine. And it's hard enough to be homeless. It, but now the Starbucks are closed and the libraries are closed. Where do you even go to the bathroom? I don't
Right.
know. I'm hoping this will all bring that more to all of our attention when it all
Yeah.
closes up. The other thing that has changed a lot, over the last 20 years, is publishing. So your
Yeah.
first book came out in '02. This book comes out in fall of 2019. How has that experience been? Because these were two sort of different processes. They were two different publishers.
Right.
It's memoir versus novel, but have you noticed publishing changes, like changes in the industry?
Mm, well, there's no doubt that, the the I mean, social media, of course, has changed the playing field for sure. The experience of being able to share in a myriad of ways, I think, is kind of freeing. Um, Initially, you know, with my first book, it was pretty traditional in terms of where I went with it. You know, there were book fairs and there were readings, and that was its life. And now, you know, I think that there's just this larger conversation that happens around a book, and it is with events maybe, but it's also, you know, it's just there's kind of this larger dialogue that has more nuance to it in some ways, right? It's not a book being presented as much as it's a book that's in, you know, in sort of this fluid exchange. So that's kind of been interesting, the way that social media has transformed the process afterwards. And you know, I think publishing, of course, is very different now, and you know, it's just a much more vast landscape. You know, I think that you know, even when we went to graduate school, I think that there was like a reverence for the process, for certain channels, for institutions, for publishers and gatekeepers. And, you know, I think a lot of that still holds true. And it's not to say that it's invalid. I think there is a lot of merit that comes to some of the checks and balances that, you know, that a publishing process can give to a work. But it's also, you know, just the world has changed in terms of who is empowered to give ideas and take ideas, and how those ideas have to look, or can look. And so that's, you know, as a writer, as an artist, it's very interesting to be able to sort of play within that.
Yeah, it's
Has it been that way for you as well? I mean, I I think, you know, you've come to it at this moment, so it's, you know, so you might only see it through this moment, but I feel like you've been around it long enough to have that perspective.
I've been around it, but both of my books came out in the last 4 years. Oil of Marble came out in 2016. This one's coming out this year. So the publishing process hasn't really changed. The self-publishing was around. It's been all of the same
Right.
thing since I've been around. I'm traditionally published, but that animal has been there, and social media has been there. And before that, yeah, I was in graduate school with you where we were talking about publishing, but I left and went to Hollywood. Like left and went to a completely different place. You know, I did I produced this kind of stuff for a living for 20 years. So my concept of publishing, it was like this other animal and this other beast. So I didn't notice the changes that happened that really shifted publishing as much because of where I was working at the time. Okay, I've let this run on longer than I sort of intended because I love you and I love talking to you and I love hearing your thoughts in this crazy time. But I have to ask a couple of random questions since we started with the pandemic. What's been your go-to pandemic snack food? Because you're the food writer, I have to know what you're eating. I mean, you wrote a crazy dystopian foodie novel. What are you eating during this? Because that's all anybody talks about anyway. So what are you eating, Carmit?
So one of my sons, has become an obsessed chef. I guess I've passed this down to him. He has made, I would say since we've been in for a month, he's made at least one recipe every day. Today it was popcorn M&M balls. He made salmon Wellington one day. He's made banana bread. I mean, just, I don't know what it is. I think he's kind of just like,
bored.
Yeah, definitely bored and like using it as a way to like be creative and, you know. So I have basically been eating everything he's making, and every now and then I'll sneak Oreos.
Oh, well, good. Wait, how old is he?
He's 11.
11. So you have 11-year-old quarantine chef for you.
Yes. You know what? If you have to be in isolation, you want to be with a budding chef, I guess.
Right? That's awesome.
What about you? What are you eating, Steph?
Yeah, I don't know. I've fallen into a bad Cheez-Its habit. I don't think that's good. That's been like my comfort food.
All right.
I've been as bad as everybody else. I had gotten off chocolate. I changed my diet to go on book tour because I was gonna be healthy before I went on book tour. And then I had to cancel all that. Now I'm doing it from my house. So I'm like, well, I guess I can eat whatever.
As long as it doesn't go neck up, you can just...
I can just balloon up from here down. Forget it. Who needs it?
That's great. But listen, Cheez-Its are protein, so I'm sure they're medically endorsed.
I don't think so. And I don't think the chocolate is endorsed either. Okay. I'm gonna let you go. Thank you for joining me on my pilot episode of this attempt to use all of my old television producing skills to help promote other writers who I love. The book, I'm actually going to blow a secret right here, right at the end. Because of the global pandemic, my brain is gone. So I don't know where the actual hard copy of your book is. I read it in hard copy. This is a mock-up. I did this like old school Hollywood. This is not your book.
I couldn't even tell.
But it's not. But you should definitely, I have a copy somewhere. It's just hiding in some pandemic hole. But if anybody's watching, you should read this book because it stayed with me. Like a lot of the imagery stayed with me and a lot of the moments have stayed with me in a really interesting way. It's particularly been working on my brain during this pandemic time when we're all freaking out about food. So if you need a perspective on it, read this. Okay, Carmit. We will do it again sometime.
No, sometime soon. Love you.
Thank you. And good night, all. Come back soon. I'll be talking with other writers. Oh, and next time I think I'm going to have a theme song. Tune in.
Stephanie Storey. Story time virtually. We've got time and plenty of stories, talking stories in a novel way. Story time with Stephanie Storey.